Forget the liars lurking in the shadows. The story we unveil today begins with a paradox. A man so obviously not who he claimed to be that even his closest supporters openly called him the thief, managed to create a state within a state. This was False Dmitry II, the Tushino Thief, an impostor whose name became a symbol of the unprecedented audacity and chaos of the time of troubles. His true origin remained obscure, lost in the swamps of anonymity, yet this didn't stop him from declaring himself the miraculously saved Tsarevich Dmitry, the second to claim this title. The irony of fate, or rather the cruelty of the era, was that this rootless adventurer, whose face few would have remembered before his ascent, managed to gather an army numbering tens of thousands. He attracted not only desperate Cossacks and Polish mercenaries, but also members of the nobility, boyars who seemingly knew the truth, yet chose to play this deadly game. Tushino, a modest village near Moscow, became his shadow capital. Here, in an improvised Kremlin, he established his court, his Duma, even his own patriarchate. It was a sinister mirror of real power, reflecting a distorted likeness. He didn't just challenge the legitimate Tsar Vasily Shuisky. He effectively divided the country into two warring factions, each with its own tsar, its own laws, and its own army. His power was ephemeral, built on lies and violence, but its destructive consequences were very real. How could a man without a name or past become such a gravitational center, attracting both society's outcasts and those who craved power at any cost? What was the nature of his charisma, or was it merely a collective blindness born of despair? We will see that this story is not about grandeur, but about how deeply a nation can fall when the foundation of its identity is shattered. It is a story of how the absence of a genuine leader gives rise to monstrous doppelgangers capable of deceiving and leading for a time. In the chaos of the time of troubles, when the very fabric of Russian society was tearing at the seams, figures emerged whose origins were shrouded in darkness. One such shadow was False Dmitry II, a man whom history branded the Tushino Thief. To understand how an obscure wanderer could lay claim to the throne, one must delve into the abyss of his origins, into the monstrous environment that spawned him. It is not definitively known where or when this man was born. Sources vary, pointing to the lowest strata of society. Perhaps a peasant from Starodub, a Jewish teacher from Shklov, or a priest's son. But one thing remains constant. He was a nobody. He possessed neither noble lineage, nor wealth, nor even a recognized name. His childhood, if it occurred in the conventional sense, was likely a series of humiliations and struggles for survival. In that era, the life of a person from the lower classes was a continuous chain of deprivation, hunger, and cold. Every day was a test of endurance, where the slightest mistake could cost one's life. Such experiences forged in him not only resilience but also a deep contempt for his own insignificance, as well as for those who emphasized it. His path to imposture was not accidental. It was forged in the crucible of humiliation and despair. In an environment where one's own identity held no weight, he saw how the desperation of the masses opened doors for those willing to play someone else's role. This was not a whim, but a cold calculation, dictated by survival in the harshest conditions. The key moment, his point of no return, was likely the realization that in a world where all old orders had collapsed and legitimacy had vanished, the only way to rise was to appropriate it. He observed how False Dmitry I, a fellow impostor, managed to seize Moscow, albeit briefly. This precedent, this audacious gamble, showed him the way. If one miraculously saved Tsarevich could deceive the country, why not a second? The environment that gave birth to the Tushino Thief was not just harsh, it was the apotheosis of cruelty. Morals were savage, human life devalued. Blood was commonplace, and lies were a tool for survival. Cities and villages suffered from hunger, banditry, and lawlessness. Central authority was absent or extremely weak. Genuine social mobility was destroyed, but on its ruins, monstrous substitutes emerged. For those who were nobodies, chaos opened up dizzying, albeit deadly, prospects. Adventurism and unscrupulousness became the main currencies. Anyone with enough courage, charisma, and willingness to walk over others could gather detachments of equally desperate people. The risks were colossal: death at the hands of enemies, betrayal by comrades, demise from hunger or disease. But for a man who had nothing to lose, These risks seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of gaining power and recognition. In this boiling cauldron of violence and deception, False Dmitry II developed into a personality capable not just of surviving, but of leading tens of thousands of people, creating the illusion of a state. His subsequent actions would confirm how deeply he had absorbed the lessons of the time of troubles, and how masterfully he used them to achieve his goals. He didn't just play a role, he lived it, proving that in an era of disbelief and despair, even the most monstrous lie could take on flesh and blood. These skills, forged in the crucible of his unknown youth, would become the foundation for his most audacious schemes. At the peak of his power, False Dmitry II, the Tushino Thief, ruled a territory larger than that of the legitimate Tsar Vasily Shuisky. His headquarters in Tushino, just 12 versts from Moscow, became a full-fledged alternative capital, bustling with life. Its own Boyar Duma convened. Prikazes, departments, operated. Coins were minted, and collected taxes flowed into the impostor's treasury. His army, numbering tens of thousands, from Polish mercenaries and Lithuanian gentry to Don Cossacks and Russian noble defectors, held the central regions of the country in fear. But for final legitimization, he needed not just military success, but a symbol capable of convincing even the most hardened skeptics. The plan. This symbol was to be Marina Mnishek, the widow of the first False Dmitry. Her recognition could instantly elevate the Tushino Thief above all other contenders, transforming him into the true, miraculously saved Tsarevich. The calculation was simple. If a woman who had already been a Tsarina recognized him as her husband, who would dare to doubt? The execution. Marina Mnishek was held captive in Yaroslavl, where Tsar Vasily Shuisky had sent her after the death of the first impostor. In September 1608, a detachment of Polish and Lithuanian cavalry, commanded by Jan Piotr Sapieha, one of Dmitry's key military leaders, marched on Yaroslavl. They did not storm the city walls. Instead, through bribed guards, contact was established with Mnishek's Polish escort. For a generous payment and promises of freedom, the guards allowed Marina to escape. Under the cover of night, wrapped in a simple cloak, she was spirited out of the city. The journey to Tushino was long and fraught with danger, but after several weeks of wandering, she was finally brought to the impostor's camp. The unexpected turn. The meeting took place in the Tushino Thief's tent. Marina, seeing before her a coarse man utterly unlike her deceased husband, was horrified. She refused to recognize him, calling him an impostor and a liar. But her situation was hopeless. She was in a foreign country, a prisoner, surrounded by people whose fate depended on this deception. Polish lords, her compatriots, convinced her that this was the only path to salvation and the recovery of influence. Within a few days, under pressure and threats, Marina broke. She uttered words that shook all of Russia. "I recognize him as my husband, Dmitry Ivanovich." Publicly, before the crowd, she confirmed that the miraculously saved Tsarevich was indeed him. She agreed to a secret wedding, which by her own words was invalid, but politically necessary. The consequences. This was a triumph for the Tushino Thief. His legitimacy soared. New boyars and nobles flocked to him, seeing him as the true Tsar, recognized even by his wife. Tushino became a full-fledged alternative capital, with its own court, prikaz, and even Patriarch Filaret, forcibly brought from Moscow. He no longer merely claimed the throne. He was the Tsar for half the country, his power extending over vast territories, collecting taxes, administering justice, and mobilizing troops. His name inspired fear from Novgorod to Astrakhan. The plan. With a massive army at his disposal and bolstered by Marina's recognition, the Tushino Thief decided to strike at the very heart of Russian spirituality, the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius. Capturing this impregnable monastery, a symbol of faith and resilience, was intended to break the moral spirit of resistance across the country, strip Tsar Vasily Shuisky of his last support, and open the path to Moscow. This was not merely a military objective, but also a psychological victory. The execution. In September 1608, Dmitry's forces, numbering about 30,000 men, under the command of Pan Sapieha, approached the Lavra's walls. The monastery, encircled by powerful stone walls up to 4 meters thick and 11 meters high, with 11 towers, was well fortified, but its garrison consisted of only a few hundred streltsy, musketeers, monks, and peasants. The siege began, which would last 16 months. Polish and Lithuanian mercenaries, Cossacks, and Russian defectors methodically shelled the walls with artillery, attempting to breach them. They dug saps, planted mines, and launched assaults, sometimes several times a day. Tens of thousands of cannonballs and grenades rained down on the monastery. The defenders, despite hunger, illness, and constant attacks, held out with incredible resilience. They returned fire, made sorties, repaired damage, and devised ingenious traps. The unexpected turn. The Tushino Thief, confident of a swift victory, underestimated not only the strength of the walls, but also the spirit of the defenders. He expected the Lavra to fall in a few weeks, not months. His troops suffered colossal losses from sorties, diseases, and cold. The monastery, instead of becoming his trophy, turned into a bloody meat grinder, draining his resources and weakening his army. Each failed assault, each repelled attack, became a public humiliation for the impostor. Moreover, the Lavra became a symbol of resistance, inspiring other cities and fortresses to hold out against the thief. The consequences. The siege of the Lavra became Dmitry's fatal mistake. It not only failed to bring him the desired victory, but also undermined his reputation. His army, already composed of a motley and often unreliable assortment of elements, dwindled. Tens of thousands of his warriors perished beneath the monastery walls. Financial and human resources were exhausted. The prolonged siege demonstrated the impostor's inability to crush the true will to resist. It exposed him as a destroyer, not a builder, showing that his kingdom rested solely on violence and fear, not on popular support. This was the first serious warning sign heralding his downfall. His power, built on lies and blood, seemed unshakable, but it inherently carried the seeds of its own destruction. Blinded by the illusion of impunity, the Tushino Thief made one mistake after another. He ruthlessly plundered the population, alienating even those who initially supported him as the legitimate Tsar. His dependence on foreign mercenaries made him a hostage to their appetites and whims, constantly demanding new conquests and plunder. He did not build a state, but merely parasitized on its remnants. His growing cruelty and arbitrary reprisals alienated many who just yesterday were ready to pledge allegiance to his name. Power founded on total deception and violence could not withstand the test of time, and soon forces pursuing their own interests began to turn against him. The shadowy figure of False Dmitry II did not emerge from a vacuum. Behind him stood not just random adventurers, but powerful forces pursuing their own deeply self-serving goals. The chief and most influential of his secret patrons was, undoubtedly, the Polish-Lithuanian magnate Jerzy Mnishek, Marina Mnishek's father. For him, the Tushino Thief was not merely a tool, but a last chance to recover lost ambitions and wealth connected to the Russian crown. Mnishek, himself ruined by previous ventures and burdened with debts, invested his last hopes in this impostor, seeing in him an opportunity not only to restore his status, but also to enthrone his daughter as Tsarina of Russia, even if alongside a dubious husband. Behind Mnishek stood a broader, but no less predatory coalition of Polish-Lithuanian gentry. Many of them, like Hetman Jan Pyotr Sapieha, who led the siege of the Trinity Lavra, were essentially mercenaries, but they acted with the approval and sometimes tacit support of King Sigismund III Vasa of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Sigismund, though he did not officially recognize False Dmitry II, well understood the benefits of chaos in Moscow. A fractured, weakened Russia was an ideal training ground for territorial claims and strengthening Warsaw's influence. He did not send regular troops directly until a certain point, but allowed his subjects to participate in the thief's adventures, turning a blind eye to their plunder and atrocities. This was a cynical but effective way of waging a proxy war, bleeding out a neighbor without direct confrontation. But it was not only foreigners who fueled this false power. Among the Tushino Thief's camp, there were also many Russian boyars, princes, and nobles, driven by resentment, thirst for power, or outright opportunism. These Tushino turncoats, as they were called in Moscow, switched allegiance from Vasily Shuisky to the impostor and back again, trying to extract maximum benefit from any situation. Among them were influential figures such as Prince Dmitry Trubetskoy, Ivan Zarutsky, and Mikhail Saltykov. They received lands, titles, and positions from the thief, but not for a second forgot their own interests. Their loyalty was ephemeral, conditioned only by current gain. Cossack Atamans, such as Ivan Zarutsky, also constituted a powerful pillar of the thief's support. For them, the time of troubles was a period of boundless freedom, plunder, and the opportunity to assert their free will without submitting to any central authority. They did not so much believe in Tsarevich Dmitry as they used his name as a banner for their raiding campaigns. Opposing this motley, greedy, and mortally dangerous coalition was the legitimate, but highly unpopular, Tsar Vasily Shuisky. His story is the tragedy of a man who ascended the throne as a result of a palace coup, but proved incapable of preventing the country from plunging into the abyss of chaos. Shuisky, a descendant of the ancient princely family of Suzdal, was an experienced courtier, but he lacked charisma, decisiveness, or broad popular support. He ascended the throne not by the will of the Zemsky Sobor, Assembly of the Land, but by the will of several boyar factions, which inherently undermined his legitimacy in the eyes of many. Throughout his 4-year reign, Vasily Shuisky desperately tried to stabilize the situation. He faced Bolotnikov's rebellion, then the invasion of False Dmitry II, and each time his methods proved insufficient. He tried to negotiate with the Polish lords, formed alliances with the Swedes, which only exacerbated the situation, causing discontent within the country and providing a pretext for intervention. His main antagonism with the Tushino Thief was not just a struggle for power, it was a battle for the very idea of Russian statehood. Shuisky personified an attempt to preserve traditional order, while False Dmitry II, consciously or not, became a catalyst for the complete disintegration of the country, a symbol of the triumph of lies, violence, and foreign interference. In this confrontation, where one clung to a fading thread of legitimacy and the other wove a web of deception and others' ambitions, the fate of a vast power was decided. But even the most intricate web of lies could not endure forever. Discontent festered within the ranks of the Tushino Thief, and those who had elevated him were preparing to cast him down. The 16-month siege of the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius became for False Dmitry II not only a military, but also a symbolic catastrophe. It exposed his inability to create, to truly govern, revealing only the predatory essence of his power. Resources dwindled, the army was exhausted, and the hope for a swift victory dissolved in the cold Tushino winters. But most importantly, the geopolitical situation was changing. When Polish King Sigismund III Vasa, who had until then only secretly supported the impostor, openly entered the war against Russia, False Dmitry II's position became hopeless. Many Polish mercenaries serving the Tushino Thief now preferred to switch to the king's direct command, seeing it as a more reliable source of plunder and legitimacy. The Tushino camp, this shadow capital, began to disintegrate from within. Among the first to realize the inevitable collapse and decide to act were those who had elevated him, the Russian boyar defectors. They sought no ideals, only profit. Now, profit dictated otherwise. To save their estates, their lives, their heads. Prince Dmitry Trubetskoy, Mikhail Saltykov, Ivan Zarutsky, all of them, who had so recently sworn allegiance to the Tsarevich, now sought paths of retreat. In December 1609, when Polish troops under Hetman Stanisław Żółkiewski were already outside Moscow, and the Tushino Poles began openly plundering Russian lands, False Dmitry II understood, the ground was slipping from under his feet. His own guard, consisting of Cossacks and minor nobles, became increasingly unreliable. The threat of not just defeat, but of being handed over, loomed over him. His last fatal mistake was the decision to flee. This was not a strategic maneuver, but a panicked retreat. On the night of December 27, 1609, disguised as a peasant and taking Marina Mnishek with him, he secretly left Tushino. His path led to Kaluga, where he hoped to gather new forces. This escape was an act of desperation, an inability to control the situation. It stripped him of the last vestiges of authority in the eyes of those who still wavered. The Tushino camp completely fell apart. Russian boyars pledged allegiance to the Polish Prince Władysław, Some Cossacks left for other cities, and the Poles joined the royal army. In Kaluga, False Dmitry II attempted to re-establish his power, once again gathering around him the remnants of Cossacks, minor nobles, and peasants enchanted by his legend. But the shadow of betrayal, once unleashed, no longer retreated. Discontent brewed in his entourage, fueled by rumors and personal grievances. The Cossack Ataman Pyotr Urusov, a Nogai Murza who served the impostor, was one of those who felt deceived and underestimated. False Dmitry II, accustomed to absolute obedience, did not notice or ignored the growing tension. He was blind to the danger emanating from his closest circle, demonstrating the arrogance that often precedes a fall. The fateful day arrived on December 11, 1610. It was an ordinary hunting day, which False Dmitry II loved so much. He was in the vicinity of Kaluga, in the Odoyevsky forests, accompanied by a small retinue. Among them was Pyotr Urusov. The impostor, confident in his safety, separated from the main group. He was riding in a sleigh, conversing with Urusov. The moment was chosen perfectly. The depths of the forest, minimal witnesses, complete suddenness. Without warning, without a single word, Urusov drew his saber. The first blow struck his side, the second, his head. False Dmitry II fell from the sleigh. His life, woven from lies and violence, ended in an instant. The body of the impostor, who had so recently claimed the Tsar's throne, was abandoned in the snow. This act of retribution, committed by one of his own supporters, was not just a murder. It was a demonstrative annihilation of a symbol that had long lost all value for those who used it. Urusov, according to one version, sought revenge for the humiliation and beating he had suffered at the hands of False Dmitry II. According to another, he acted at the instigation of Moscow or Polish agents, seeking to eliminate an inconvenient figure. In any case, it was the end. The end of a man who was neither a Tsar nor Dmitry, nor even simply a free man, but merely a puppet in the hands of powerful forces. His death became another spiral of chaos, but for him personally, an inglorious finale. His story is not just a chronicle of the time of troubles, but a deep analysis of how the thirst for power and blind faith in imposture can destroy not only a country, but also the person himself, turning him into an instrument of others' interests. Death during a hunt, by the saber of a Cossack Ataman. Such was the inglorious end awaiting the man who, only recently, had styled himself the legitimate Tsar of all Russia. The Tushino Thief, who almost overthrew the Shuisky dynasty, left behind neither grandeur nor an enduring state legacy, only a trail of destruction and chaos. His story is not merely a chapter in the annals of the time of troubles. It is a ruthless lesson in the mechanisms of deception and self-deception, universal and timeless. The paradox of his legacy lies in the fact that an insignificant man, whose true origin is lost in conjecture, managed for several years to keep an entire state in suspense, cleave it into two parts, and compel tens of thousands of people to shed blood for his lie. He possessed neither royal lineage, nor outstanding military talents, nor even the particular charisma attributed to the first impostor. His power rested on a far more precarious, yet incredibly robust foundation: society's readiness to believe in an illusion. This mechanism was simple and brilliant in its cynicism. In a society exhausted by hunger, epidemics, and political instability, where the legitimate rule of Tsar Vasily Shuisky inspired neither trust nor hope, a desperate need for a miracle arose. False Dmitry II offered this miracle. He didn't merely declare himself the miraculously saved Tsarevich. He became the living embodiment of universal despair and the hope for deliverance. His appearance was an answer to the unspoken plea of millions. Let there be someone, anyone, who will restore order and justice, even at the cost of another lie. He exploited not only naivete but also deep social divisions: Cossacks, Polish mercenaries, Russian boyar, defectors. Each saw in him the key to their own ambitions, enrichment, or revenge. The impostor, who had nothing, became a center of gravity for those who wanted to seize something from the torn country. They did not so much believe in his royal origin as they used him as a flag for their own ends, thereby creating a collective illusion of legitimacy. Their own willingness to deceive themselves, to accept a convenient lie, became his primary support. The Tushino Thief himself, immersing himself in his role, seemed to dissolve into it. He didn't just play a Tsar. He became one for himself and for those around him. His actions, his decrees, his court, all were part of a grand spectacle in which he was both director, lead actor, and perhaps one of the most profoundly deceived spectators. He didn't just deceive others, he lived in his own deception, which became his reality. The story of False Dmitry II is a timeless narrative about how deeply ingrained lies, reinforced by a collective desire to believe, can become a powerful force capable of turning the world upside down. It is a tale of the fragility of truth in the face of despair, and of people's readiness to accept any fairy tale, as long as it promises an escape from an unbearable reality. It is no wonder that after his death, when the country finally plunged into anarchy, many more false Dmitrys appeared, each attempting to replicate his success. Ultimately, the story of the Tushino Thief forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. Is not deception itself, as well as our readiness to believe in it, an inherent part of human nature, especially when reality becomes too unbearable? And what happens when a society, desperately searching for a savior, ceases to